The barn door stood half open, swaying gently against the frame each time the wind slipped through the valley. Dust spiraled in the narrow shaft of light, and there, curled against a pile of faded burlap sacks, lay a small pup. Its body was wiry with hunger, fur matted and pale with neglect, but it clutched something tighter than warmth itself. Between its paws, pressed close to its chest, was a photograph, the edges curled and stained by weather. The image, though blurred by grime, caught the faint outline of a woman's face and the sweep of a wide field behind her. The pup's breath came shallow, the tremor of exhaustion running through its ribs, yet it refused to loosen its grip. From outside, the muffled sound of boots drew closer. The farmer, Elias, had come to check the old barn before evening set in. At 70, he moved with the careful rhythm of someone who had long since grown used to both silence and ache. His land stretched thin, the soil reluctant now to yield what it once had, but he still walked the fields at dusk, as though habit itself was a tether to the past. As he reached for the barn door, his hand paused mid-air. The faint whimper inside was not the cry of a fox or the flutter of trapped sparrows. It was steady, low, and pleading. He pushed the door gently and let the dusk spill across the floor. The pup lifted its head, eyes too large for its thin face, and met Elias's gaze with a weariness that belonged to something much older. Its paws shifted, but the photograph remained pressed against its chest. Elias stepped inside, each board creaking beneath his weight. He had seen strays before, plenty of them lingering at the edges of fields, chasing the scent of chickens or scraps, but never had he found one holding on to a thing so human. His first instinct was to retreat, to leave whatever story this was untouched. But something about the dog's stillness kept him rooted where he stood. The light dimmed further as clouds moved across the evening sky. Dust motes thickened, hanging between them like a curtain. Elias lowered himself to the ground, not too close, but enough that the pup could sense he meant no harm. He didn't call out, didn't coax. Words often frightened more than they soothed. Instead, he set his hands flat on the earth, palms open. The pup's ears flicked at the sound of his knees against the dirt. Its body tensed, a faint growl working its way up from its throat, yet it did not release the photograph. For a long moment, neither moved. The pup's breath rasped, the photograph fluttering faintly with the rise and fall of its chest. Elias's eyes, adjusting to the dimness, caught the faint smile on the woman's face in the picture. It was not his family, not his history, yet the sight of it struck him with an unexpected pang, as though memory had been stirred by something he could not name. He leaned back slightly, giving the animal space, but his gaze lingered on that fragile scrap of paper. Outside, the wind pressed harder against the barn walls, rattling the loose boards. The pup flinched, curling tighter around its prize, its body shivering against the sacks. Elias's hand twitched as though to reach forward, but he stopped himself. The dog's eyes held something more than fear. They carried the weight of absence, a hollow longing etched into instinct itself. Whatever had brought it here, whatever story lay in the photograph, was not for him to force open. He stayed a while longer, sitting in the dim barn with the pup, listening to the hush of wind and the quiet labor of its breathing. When at last he rose, the dog had not moved, nor had it surrendered the picture. Elias closed the barn door behind him, leaving the animal wrapped around its secret. As dusk fell completely over the valley, what tied a starving pup to an old photograph remained unanswered, but the unease followed Elias back through the fields, as though the land itself held a memory he had yet to uncover. The next morning, Elias returned to the barn before the sun had fully lifted the mist from the valley. The fields were hushed, the soil still dark with dew, and the only sound came from the drip of condensation slipping from the eaves. He pushed the barn door open, half expecting the pup to be gone, carried away by the night. But it was still there, pressed against the burlap sacks, the photograph shielded under its chin. Its eyes blinked at the sudden spill of daylight, glassy and dull with exhaustion. When it tried to rise, its paw faltered, sending a faint whine through the stillness. Elias saw it then, a gash along the pup's hind leg, darkened with dried blood and rimmed with swelling. The wound wasn't fresh, but it was raw enough to explain the animal's frailty. He felt a stir of frustration at himself for not noticing it last evening, for leaving the creature curled in pain. Yet he hesitated, knowing too well how quickly fear could turn to teeth if he reached too soon. The pup shifted, dragging its injured leg closer to its body, the photograph never slipping from its grasp. He crouched in the doorway, letting the morning air drift between them. From outside came the low coo of doves, their rhythm steady against the fragile silence inside the barn. Elias picked up a piece of kindling lying by the threshold and rolled it slowly across the dirt floor. The pup's eyes tracked it but did not move. Instead, its body pressed tighter into the sacks, guarding the photograph with a defiance that looked too deliberate to be only instinct. Elias set the kindling aside. He understood, whatever pain the pup carried, it had bound itself not to survival alone, but to that scrap of paper. He went back to the farmhouse and returned with a shallow pan of water. Setting it down near the sacks, he slid it forward with the heel of his boot. The pup sniffed at it cautiously, then drank in hurried gulps, pausing only to clutch the photograph tighter with its paw. Each swallow seemed to steady it, though its leg trembled when it shifted its weight. Elias stayed low, unmoving, watching as the dog finally eased its head down again, as if strength could only be borrowed in small portions. Through the cracks in the barn wall, the day's light grew sharper. A crow perched on the fence outside and gave a harsh call that made the pup flinch. Elias noticed then that the photograph's surface had been worn in one corner, not only from dirt but from repeated touch, as though the dog had dragged it across distance, refusing to abandon it. The woman's face, though blurred, looked younger the longer he studied it, her eyes lit by something he couldn't name. He turned away, unsettled, for he had never seen her before. Later that afternoon, as he went about tending to the animals, Elias left the barn door ajar. When he returned, the pup had shifted slightly, its paw draped over the edge of the photograph, leaving more of the image exposed. Alongside the woman's face was the faint outline of another figure, a child, perhaps, standing in the field's edge, nearly lost in the faded light of the print. Elias froze at the sight. What he had thought was a simple portrait was something else, a memory of more than one life caught together, though whose lives he couldn't guess. He knelt closer this time, careful not to startle. The pup's ears twitched, but it did not growl. Its chest rose and fell in a slower rhythm as if thirst had softened its guard. Elias extended his hand toward the photograph, not to take it, but only to touch the dirt beside it. The pup's paw shifted in response, drawing the paper closer again, its eyes half opening to watch him. No snarl, no snap, just a quiet warning that the boundary remained. Elias withdrew, leaving only the press of his palm's warmth in the soil. By evening, rain had begun to fall, light at first, then steady, tapping against the tin roof of the barn. The sound filled the space with a rhythm both calming and tense, a mirror of the uneasy truce between man and pup. Elias lit a lantern and set it on the floor, its glow casting long shadows across the walls. He could see the dog's wound more clearly now. The swelling had worsened, the skin around it hot and angry. If left untreated, infection would take it, and the thought pricked at him like a thorn lodged deep in flesh. Yet still he waited, uncertain of whether his hand would be accepted or refused. As the lantern flickered, the pup lifted its head and shifted its body closer to the sacks, its muzzle brushing the photograph once more. Rain hammered harder against the roof, drowning the quiet. Elias watched as a drop of water, slipping through a crack in the boards, struck the edge of the photograph, spreading the ink further into blur. The pup whimpered and pawed at it, as though to shield what remained. Elias felt the weight of the moment settle in his chest. The story held in that image was slipping, dissolving under water, and the dog was fighting to keep it alive. He reached forward at last, breaking the stillness. His hand poised not over the dog but over the photograph's fragile corner. A pale drizzle had set in by morning, fine threads of rain drawing faint silver lines across the barn's roof. The old wood creaked as moisture settled into it, the boards darkening where drops slid down. Inside, the pup had shifted closer to the doorway, its body curled tighter than before. The photograph was still pinned beneath its paw, though dampness had begun to seep into its edges, blurring the ink at its corners. Each breath came shallow, and when it coughed, a fleck of red spotted the burlap sack beneath it. Elias stood in the doorway, hat tipped low to shield his face from the rain. His eyes moved to the ground where the dog lay and then to the photograph, which now bore the faint outline of a soldier's uniform, a detail he hadn't noticed in the dim light of yesterday. He stepped closer, slow enough that his boots hardly broke the rhythm of dripping rain. The pup did not rise, but its eyes tracked him, pupils wide, the faintest growl humming from its throat. He crouched a few feet away, watching its ribs shudder. Something had worsened overnight. The wound he hadn't seen before, a shallow gash across the flank, matted with dried blood, told its own story. Perhaps barbed wire, perhaps another dog, perhaps something darker in the wild fields beyond. Whatever the cause, the animal's stillness was less about distrust now and more about fatigue. Elias drew in a slow breath and set down a strip of cloth from his pocket, leaving it within reach. He didn't move closer. The choice remained the dog's. A sudden crack of thunder rolled through the valley, low and prolonged, rattling the loose panes of the barn window. The pup flinched hard, its paw tightening over the photograph. In that movement, the image turned just enough to catch more light. The woman's face clearer now, her hand resting on the shoulder of the uniformed man beside her. Husband and wife, or mother and son. A family framed against the open fields, their posture carrying something Elias recognized too well. Pride tangled with farewell. The drizzle grew steadier, tapping its rhythm on the roof. Elias glanced at the wound again, and then at the photograph. A thought edged its way in, that the pup wasn't guarding the picture for possession, but because it knew something about absence, about holding on to what couldn't be returned. His jaw tightened at the recognition. He had lost once, too. Different faces, different decades, but the echo of it pressed against him like the rain-soaked air. The pup shifted, releasing a faint whine. Its paw slipped just slightly from the photograph, leaving it exposed on the damp floor. Elias hesitated. To take it would mean breaking whatever fragile trust had held between them, but to leave it meant watching the paper disintegrate under rain and neglect. He stretched a hand slowly, palm open, hovering just above the image. The dog's ears pinned back, but it did not lunge. Instead, its eyes fixed on his hand, weighing the gesture as though the decision carried more weight than either of them could name. Outside, the drizzle thickened into rain, drumming harder on the roof. A gust of wind swept through the barn, scattering dust and rain in a fine mist. The photograph trembled beneath Elias's hand, its ink already smudging. At last, he pressed his palm gently over it, shielding it from the spray. The pup gave a single, low growl, but it did not strike. Instead, it let its head drop to the burlap sack, too weak to protest further. Elias lifted the photograph slowly, careful not to tear the fragile paper. His eyes scanned the faces again, the soldier, the woman, the field behind them, and for the first time he noticed a detail he could not ignore. Behind the couple, blurred but unmistakable, stood a farmhouse almost identical to his own, its slanted roof and broken fence rendered in the faded print. The dog stirred, its gaze following his as though it, too, understood what had just been revealed. The barn felt suddenly smaller, the rain outside louder, as if the land itself had pressed closer around them. Elias set the photograph gently against his chest, caught between recognition and disbelief. The pup let out a long, uneven breath and closed its eyes. Elias remained crouched in the half-light, the photograph trembling in his weathered hands, knowing that whatever story it carried had roots tangled deeper into his own soil than he had ever imagined. Rain had moved in without warning, fine as ash and steady as breath, darkening the soil outside the barn until the ground seemed to drink it whole. Inside, the air grew damp, the smell of wet wood rising with each drop that found its way through cracks in the roof. The pup stirred restlessly, its frail body trembling harder now, the photograph clinging damp against its chest. Elias stood in the doorway, torn between the instinct to leave the animal to its own stubborn will and the quiet urgency pressing against him. Something was shifting. Something no longer allowed the comfort of waiting. The pup tried to stand. Its paws slid against the burlap, nails scraping the floor, before its legs buckled beneath the effort. A faint cry escaped, hoarse and broken, and for the first time the photograph slipped a few inches away. Elias took a single step forward, the boards sighing beneath his weight. The pup snapped its head up, a spark of defiance flashing, but the strain was too much. One paw fell over the edge of the picture, pinning it as though instinct alone demanded it never be lost again. Elias knelt, the rain pattering against his shoulders as it slipped through the barn roof. He noticed what he had missed before, The photograph wasn't just stained by dirt and age. It was creased sharply down the middle as though it had been folded, carried, unfolded, and folded again many times. The woman's face was worn, but her expression endured, softened by that repeated wear. Something tightened in Elias's chest. He reached out, not for the pup, but for the photograph itself, fingers hesitating in the air. The pup's growl was little more than a rasp now, yet it bared its teeth, pressing its frail body over the picture. Its determination held even as its limbs shook beneath the weight of fever. Elias lowered his hand slowly, flattening it against the earth instead. The barn filled with the sound of rain ticking harder on the roof, each drop an echo to the silence between them. Then came another sound, faint, deliberate, and wrong. From the far side of the field, through the blur of rain, Elias heard the shuffle of movement where there should have been none. His head turned sharply. The valley was empty of neighbors, the farm long past the days when children or passers-by strayed through. A fox, perhaps, or a stray dog drawn by the scent of weakness. His gaze sharpened through the drizzle until he caught it, a shadow slipping along the tree line, low and purposeful. The pup sensed it too. Its ears twitched, body stiffening despite exhaustion. The photograph slid a little more to the side, but its paw dragged it back. Elias's jaw set. Whatever lingered beyond the field would not find an easy prize. He reached for the old iron hook still fixed by the door, pulling down the length of rusted chain that had once tethered the gate. The weight of it in his hand brought no comfort, only the recognition that he could no longer remain a bystander. The rain thickened, blurring the field into shifting gray. The shadow moved closer, its outline uncertain, too large for a fox, too steady for a wandering dog. Elias held still, the chain coiled in his hand, listening to the rhythm of paws on softened earth. The pup's gaze never left him now. The defiance in its eyes faltered, replaced by something smaller, something closer to surrender. It did not fight when he reached forward at last and slid the photograph gently from beneath its paw. The paper was soaked through, but even under the streaks of rain Elias could see it clearly now. The woman's face, younger than he had first realized, stood not in a wide field but against the wooden slats of this very barn. Behind her, faint but unmistakable, was the silhouette of a dog, broad-chested, ears proud, watching the camera with the alertness of an animal that belonged wholly to someone. Elias froze, the recognition sinking into him with the weight of thunder. Outside, the shadow broke the line of trees. A figure lowered its head, moving with the heavy gait of hunger. The pup whimpered once, thin and weak, curling tighter though the photograph was no longer in its grasp. Elias's hand tightened around the paper, the other gripping the chain. The barn door shuddered with the growing wind, the air thick with rain and the press of something inevitable. The old photograph had not simply been clutched, it had been guarded, and what it revealed shifted the story of this stray into something far more entangled with the land than Elias had imagined. The sound of wet footsteps in the field drew nearer, steady and unhurried. The figure that had moved across the field revealed itself at last. Not a predator, but a gaunt shepherd mix, its ribs cutting shadows beneath its soaked fur. It paused just beyond the barn door, head lowered, nose pulling at the scent of both dog and man. Elias's hand, still gripping the chain, loosened as the truth settled into him. This was no prowler intent on violence, only another stray pulled toward the faint warmth that still lingered in his failing farm. The pup at his feet shifted weakly, letting out a sound that was neither growl nor cry, but something closer to recognition. Elias stepped back, the chain slack in his hand. The older dog hesitated in the rain, its eyes fixed on the smaller one curled on the burlap sacks. For a breath, the two regarded each other, and then the larger dog turned, not toward them, but away, pacing back across the field with deliberate slowness, as though leading rather than retreating. The pup tried once more to rise, its legs trembling, but its body refused to follow. Its head dropped against the damp photograph. Elias knelt, setting the chain aside. He placed the photograph gently near the pup's muzzle, not to claim it, not to understand it, but to give back what it had chosen to guard. In the rain-streaked light, the details sharpened. The woman's smile, the outline of this very barn, and beside her the proud stance of a shepherd dog, broad and steady. The resemblance to the gaunt figure outside was unmistakable. What Elias had thought a threat had been something else entirely: kinship, searching, and perhaps the end of a long circling back to where it began. The rain softened. It no longer drummed against the roof but slid in quiet rivulets down the walls. Elias lifted the pup carefully, its body weightless in his arms, the photograph pressed against its chest. For a moment it resisted, then stilled, the shiver of distrust fading into something quieter, more tired. He carried it to the open door, where the evening was clearing into a pale horizon. The shepherd mix had stopped at the tree line, waiting, its head turned over one shoulder. Elias set the pup down at the edge of the barn, the damp grass cool beneath its paws. It did not rise, but it lifted its head, eyes tracking the larger dog in the distance. The photograph slipped from its chest, caught by a breeze, and landed face up in the wet grass. Elias did not retrieve it. Some things, he thought, were not meant to be carried further than this moment. The older dog turned once more, gave no call, made no plea, but its stillness was enough. The pup closed its eyes briefly, then opened them again, gaze fixed outward, as if weighing whether strength would return. Elias knew then what choice was being asked, and it was not his to make. He remained beside the pup, neither urging nor stopping, only present. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and the faint sweetness of hay. It tugged at the photograph until it lifted slightly, edges curling, then settled back into the grass. Elias looked down at the image one final time. The woman's face was blurred now with water, yet her expression remained soft, almost as if she too had been waiting for this moment. The pup did not stand, but its breathing steadied, no longer frantic, no longer clinging. Its gaze lingered on the tree line, where the older dog waited like a memory returned. Elias rose slowly, leaving the photograph where it lay, and stepped back into the barn's shadow. By the time he looked again, the field was empty save for the wet grass and the photograph resting among it. The shepherd mix had moved on, the pup no longer straining against the earth, and the rain clouds were breaking apart to reveal a muted strip of evening light. The wind came again, gentle now, lifting dust from the old paw prints at the barn's threshold.